you studied with famous teachers and a famous institution. What was your story? How did you get started on piano? Were you motivated from beginning?
Well, according to what my parents told me, and according to my own early recollections, I was born very musical. I wanted to sing. I wanted my mom to sing for me. And then when I was sent to the kindergarten, then there was a lady who was doing some kind of, music appreciation lessons twice a week. And I remember them being, my favorite pastime. And so when I would come back home, I would imagine that I was playing on the piano using a little children's table and putting in front of me some children's books as if they were music. Yeah. So, and then my parents figured out that it is so unmistakably clear that they hired the piano teacher for me. They bought a piano and hired the piano teacher so that I learn before entering the school. So I started learning when I was 6, and I went to school when I was 7, because that's how we entered the school in, I guess, all over the world. And then, of course, I was very successful. Basically, I was considered one of the best, and that's why when the time came, I graduated from that school was 1 year ahead of my peers. I did 2 classes in 1 year. So when I went to Moscow, I was the youngest of all those entering the Moscow Conservatory that year. And as I already told you, I was lucky enough to be accepted. And I entered the class of a very famous pianist, very famous Soviet pianist, Tatyana Nikolaeva, because she was a member of the admission jury. But the man that I really wanted to study with, he was not in the jury that year. And since I came from Odessa and nobody knew me, and most aspirants were from Moscow, from the Central Music School or from the musical college, both connected to the conservatory. So they had already their mentors who expected them to enter their classes. So I had to have somebody behind me, and that was Tatyana Nikolaeva. And I studied 2 years with her, and she was a wonderful musician. She played basically all works of Bach for clavier. She played all the Beethoven sonatas. I mean, she loved these cycles of opera omnia, yeah? But she had 18 students the year I entered. And I understood quite early that if I want to learn, I have to go to another teacher. And that teacher who I wanted to go from this outset, Dmitri Bashkirov. So, and after 2 years of studies, Bashkirov agreed to take me into his class. And that's how my studies really began. Because he, as opposed to Nikolaeva, had only 4 pupils. Imagine, 18 or 4. So he was able to dedicate to each one, give a necessary attention to each one of us. And I remember after the first lesson, I was going the streets of Moscow, but I felt that I was not going, I was flying. I felt that my feet were not even touching the ground. It was an incredible. So and I learned a lot in the 3 years remaining, because we're giving 5 years of study there in Russian institutions of universities. So out of 5 years, 3 I spent with Bashkirov, and I had to learn in 3 years what my peers, what my colleagues learned in 5 years. And then I won the prize in the Soviet Union national Tchaikovsky competition, national. But they didn't allow me to enter the international. And that was the reason I left the Soviet Union in 1974. And also I must tell you that the requirements for the studies after the diploma, they are called in Russia aspirantura, which you can translate like postgraduate studies or something like that. So there are also requirements, and they provide that one should have the notes not less than 4. We had the 5 point system, yeah? 5 being the highest. And I had 5 in all the disciplines, except the communism as a science. There I had a 3, and 3 was not acceptable. Of course, if they wanted me to go on and study in this postgraduate diploma, they would have asked the professor of the discipline communism as a science, they would have asked him to lift my note into 4, but nobody cared. So and then since I was not allowed to play at the Tchaikovsky International Competition, I was heartbroken. And so I decided to take up this offer given by the Americans to Brezhnev. Let my people go and let the Jews go. So that's how I left the Soviet Union back in 74. And then I came to New York, but and then after I came to New York, I went back to Europe and studied 1 year in Vienna. So, and then I came really to settle in New York. It was 75, 76. And just maybe a couple of months after I came to New York, I entered the Young Concert Artists International audition, guided by Susan Wadsworth. And I won them. And so, and this is a fantastic organization, which was to me twice as fantastic, because coming from the Soviet Union, socialist country, I was not ready to take the whole financial responsibility upon myself. I didn't understand how come I had to pay my airfare, my hotel bills, you see, because in the Soviet Union, all this were paid by the government, yeah. And, but this YCA, Young Concert Artists, they provided us with this kind of services. So it was a very humane transition for me from a socialist country aspiring to be a communist country into this capitalist country, the United States being what it is, yeah, or what they are. So that eased a little bit my way, helped me. And that's how I started. I had my New York debut, and Los Angeles debut, Washington, DC, and I played with many orchestras.
Could I ask that the last 3 years of your study with your dream professor, what was that he taught you that you carried with you all your life? What was the soul of that teaching?
I guess the most important thing was that he approached the work as a stage director or a symphonic conductor, an opera conductor would, in that he was immediately working on the structure of the piece and bringing us consciously to be aware of all that concerned the composition. Nothing was left to a chance. And yet, once the work was done, and that I remember also appreciated immensely, if on the stage, if one is talented and then the adrenaline works, then the stage, new ideas and new inspirations open up to you while you're already interpreting. But that happens only if the work behind that is done in a very minute, scrupulous way. Nothing left to chance. Pedal, formal grasp, sound realization, especially different, a rich palette of sound. So with many contrasts, avoiding a sort of like a neutral mezzo forte, having contrasts, but not just simply invented contrasts, but contrasts that lie within the music, which have to be discovered or opened up by us interpreters. So that was for me the biggest revelation, that I never, after studying with him, went on the stage hoping to simply to rely on my inspiration and expect that the muse will descend upon the stage with me as the mediator. No, 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 no. I had prepared the work scrupulously, minutely, knowing from the first note to the last what I'm doing and what I'm supposed to do. And then when the highest or the higher inspirational moments descended upon me, that were the moments of magic that are expected from us when we perform. There is nothing without the magic if we talk about the true interpretation. Because if you just learn the notes, no matter how well, and then you simply replay them on the stage, then it's just like a school task which asked of you to retell the story. There is one of, in the literature or English lessons, you have one of the tasks, upon the students. Sometimes you write a thesis, but sometimes you write a retelling story. And all this terminology I don't know in English because I never went to school in America or in England. So, but that would only mean that you're just a diligent student who did his homework well, but that's not artistry. From an artist, we expect as listeners something unexpected, unheard of. The works of classical music are so endless, that can be so endlessly explored, and at any given time they open up new perspectives, new angles, that it is up to us interpreter to come across them and convey, and that will be something unexpected by the audience, but the musicians in the audience as well. And this is the most, what we treasure the most, this aspect. You know, when Richter, in the film Bruno Monsejean, made just shortly before he died, yeah, there is a leitmotif in that film where he constantly says, I listened to my tape, to a tape of my concert, and there is nothing unpredictable there. Nothing surprises me. And he wanted to be surprised. And that was his big, big disappointment. And you see how important it is. You know? And I remember in my diploma, when I played the recital program and the concerto, we played the concerto in the diploma, but not with the orchestra accompanied by the second piano. And I did the first Rachmaninoff in that diploma. And there was a moment in the recapitulation of the first movement that I played the main subject totally differently from the way we worked upon. And that was because it came to me, this inspiration. And then when I spoke to Bashkirov after my exam, and I mentioned that, I said, well, that happened to me, something overcame. And he said, and for that, I was ready to kiss you up. Because that he himself considered also to be the most treasured element in our profession. And you know what, very important is not to look for it artificially. It's there. You just have to have enough talent and enough intellectual preparation to find it there. It's there. You just have to find it, discover it. Because when we play a Beethoven sonata, this eternal literature, every epoch tells us something new about these Beethoven sonatas, which we didn't know before. Yeah. That's why they're classic. That's why they're immortal. Except that we now enter a phase where I hear and read so much about this movement, and also in the United States, about cancel culture, yeah? That to do away with all these classical composers, which is very scary. And now in the Ukraine, because of this tragic war, people are trying to respond to this aggression by Russia. They want to fight it in any possible way. So some of them fight even the classical Russian composers. They say, we don't want to hear Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, Scriabin, Mussorgsky, Prokofiev these days. Yeah. So what can we do? I mean, this is something that it's probably a contemporary state of mind, but we have to bear with it.
I was just curious about how you approach each time period.
I am not a friend of this classification, classical, romantic. It is so primitive and so easy to say, oh, he uses pedal when he plays Bach, and his Bach is romantic. Well, it's such a bull. If one reads about the interpretation, about these stylistic specialties of Bach, for example, and one listens to Bach interpreters on the instruments that were Bach's contemporary instruments. For example, we know that Bach wrote for organ and for harpsichord. and for clavichord. There was no modern piano as such, although there had already been some attempts made, and apparently I said when I wrote a thesis to my double CD recording of Bach, I did a little bit of research and read a lot of what Rosalind Turek had to say and listened to her lecture. And she said that there is a document telling us that Bach did own a piano that has a mechanic that is close to ours. So, but if one listens to organists or harpsichordists playing Bach, which is a Baroque style, with tremendous effects that music called for, with tremendous freedom in the way of treating the chords, the left hand, the phrasing, then you all but must transfer it to the modern piano. You can't leave it unresearched. You can't leave it unnoticed and start playing Bach on the modern piano like a typewriter. Of course, we need pedal because pedal opens so many new layers in playing a work of Bach. Yeah, all this polyphonic structure with the help of pedal helps us in the piano to make these voices more audible because we can differentiate them better. Plus the dynamics, this dynamics in Bach, they were also very clearly defined. And if you study what Busoni said, right, he said that you can't do, for example, this romantic diminuendo crescendo with Bach, but you must absolutely be in charge of this dynamics called the terrace. Yeah. So there are manuals that were used by Bach, even in harpsichord. Then, for example, when you take the Italian concerto, then the way it sounded in Bach times would today, on one harpsichord with two manuals, would today require two pianos to bring this festivity and this parade in the sound. So that's why I don't go by this romantic classical. To me, it's totally very primitive, no? And especially this rubato in Bach. Yeah? It's not rubato, it's a Chopin's rubato, but it's rubato that refers to these affects that the music of Bach is full for. And when I go with Chopin, which the more I live, the more important this composer becomes to me. There is exactly what they call romantic playing. Is totally off place because Chopin was the most classical of all romantic composers. And his style requires serenity, noblesse, and very careful approach, treatment of the left hand. That the left hand would not just go berserk, but it would be this foundation for spinning out this bel canto that Chopin music is full of. And so it goes, with the whole literature. And besides, we should never forget that every epoch offers us in the music of our classics something that is today specifically actual, modern. And this modernity we have to be able to discover in any particular sonata. And I also believe very much in the associative thinking. For example, when I played Schubert A major sonata, the early one, and I played not long before the Forellen Quintet, the Trout, yeah, which is also in the same key. Yeah. And then I discovered so many similarities that when I worked on the sonata A major of Schubert and played, then to me, it's like a continuation of the Trout Quintet. And that opened for me so many new ways of coloring my sound. Or for example, when Richter once, in one of the very rare interviews, he said that when he played the Rimsky-Korsakov piano concerto, which is a piece, it's not his best work. His best works are operas. But Richter loved the operas by Rimsky-Korsakov. And so he played this piano concerto of Rimsky-Korsakov with all of this bagage, all of the luggage of his knowledge of Rimsky-Korsakov operas. So it enabled him to open up in that piano concerto so many undiscovered riches that that were possible only because he had his operas of Rimsky in his system, which I do too, because I absolutely love Rimsky-Korsakov's opera. Like, I am a big fan of the Russian opera. That's my favorite opera, more than the Italian or the German. And I've conducted some.
Would you recommend that a student to really study some opera?
Yes. I would not recommend the students to become opera conductors if they don't have the talent and the knowledge of it. But I would recommend them very much to study operas, no, but not only operas, also when you do Beethoven, it's more important that you study his quartets, string quartets, in order to play the sonatas. You know? Symphonies too, but especially quartets. And when you study Tchaikovsky, when you play piano works of Tchaikovsky, then it would help very much if you knew his symphonies and operas. Yeah.
How do you use what you already have in you and communicate that to your students?
Well, I learn how to teach by being a student of my teacher, because his lessons were so clearly structured and so dramaturgically so well designed that I automatically took it over from him. And that's why I continue in my teaching that same way of teaching. For example, when I came to Germany, and probably in the United States, it is so too. A teacher begins to ask a pupil all sorts of questions. Well, the pupil comes to you to answer his questions, not for him to tell you the answers. Yeah, of course, sometimes I ask also pupil, very seldom, if there is something very specific I want to know if he knows that. But basically, I conduct the lesson in a way a stage director would, or a conductor would conduct the rehearsal. You know? I start working on the shape of the composition, style, the means to use in order to come about it, in order to be able to materialize it, realize it pianistically, all sorts of ways of achieving the best results using the least effort. Very important question is the fingering, the pedaling, because all these aspects, they are not exterior, they are intrinsic. The fingering is often the key to realizing to go about the pianistical difficulty, pianistical obstacle. A good fingering opens, it becomes simple. Yeah. So this is a very important aspect in our job as teachers. This is, I learned in Moscow, very precise, exact with the text. Never leave anything to, never be clumsy, and never be inaccurate with what's written. Yeah. Each pause, each slur, each pedal marking, all is part of the text that we should first be absolutely faithful to. And on top of it, then we create. Right? Never be your artistic fantasy, never use your artistic fantasy at the costs of the text. Text is like A and B. And then once you have it within you, then all of new freedoms open up.
Now you've achieved a lot in your lifetime. What's next? What are the projects that you dream of doing?
Probably maybe some works that I haven't played or learned that I still will be able to make my own, yeah, to appropriate. Because the piano literature is so enormous, and every now and then I encounter a composition that I think, but this is unforgivable of me not to have played it, not to have included it into my repertoire. Even if I won't be able to play it publicly, but I want to at least make it part of my own. You know, I would still like, maybe I've never taught privately, but now I'd like to take a few pupils who want to study particularly with me, and that for me would be interesting to prepare them for important competitions or projects. So this is one of the things that, and I've never taught privately before because I felt that my teaching job at the university is enough of teaching, because I was always very active as a performer at the same time. So I couldn't take up another teaching, but now, yes. And of course, I like to be a judge in interesting competitions. I'd like to do this work. I've been doing it quite a lot.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to your concert Tuesday night.